So you've moved or you're making plans to move to the good old USA, and you want to ensure that your child doesn't forget his or her native tongue? Well, this can be challenging and emotional for many families, especially families that have immigrated to the United States and are still raising kids. And you don't want them to forget your native tongue. So this is the topic we'll be discussing today. Hey guys, my name is George Jaramillo, and I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel where we talk about everything that revolves around the language of English. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss the importance of ensuring that your child does not forget their native tongue, and also how this could be challenging and emotional for some families. But I'm going to help you get through this ordeal with some stories and tips and tricks in hopes that we can get your kids feeling good about their ancestors' native language. And if you ask me, I feel that it's very important that our children remain connected to their roots. In my case, my roots, they stem from Colombia, South America. So I am what we consider a Latino, or Hispanic American here in the good old US of A. Two of the ways that I've maintained my connection with my cultural identity is through music and language. But today, we'll focus on language primarily. Listen, language is more important than we realize. And it's much more important than I could have ever realized. So if we want to learn to embrace our origins, we can literally transform our life, or at least we can transform the way we see life. Let me say that again. Embracing your origins can transform your outlook on life. And this is one of the most important points that I'll talk about. And I'll give you some examples of how it transformed my life. So, how I experienced this planet and my existence on it is differently than most. Okay? What I mean is culturally speaking, I experience it differently. And that makes me superior to my fellow Americans. But before any gringos or peoples watching this video begin hooting and hollering and getting themselves in a tizzy, hear me out. As a fellow gringo, I once thought that the world walked around barefoot and lived in huts, and that the rest of the world was a desert, and so on. I'm so ashamed to say this, but I was brainwashed. Here in America, we're fed so much nonsense through our mainstream media, the news outlets, and through Hollyweird. And most Americans were fed an exaggerated stereotype of each and every country on this flat, round planet Earth. So I was ignorant to anything outside of the United States. And quite frankly, I could have cared less about any other country other than this one. But let me tell you how that all changed. And hopefully my story will serve as a foundation so that for you at home, when you're dealing with your child and the preservation of your native tongue in their lives, you'll at least hear my story echo in your mind, and you will know there's hope. So here we go. Once upon a time, there was a young, vibrant, good-looking man, and he fell in love with a Colombian girl. So this young man traveled to Colombia, South America, to meet his fiance's family, my future in-laws. And I was scared to death because every news report or movie involving Colombia, the country, and its people, it portrayed them as a drug lord, infested, savage crime, lawless, shoeless, shirtless, hot temperature, like desert, hut living place that no right-minded American should ever think of visiting. But after sweating bullets upon my arrival to the country of Colombia, to their airport, and after letting my guard down, I quickly realized that, boy, was I wrong. It was the most beautiful country I've ever visited. And the people, the food, the music, and life in general, they were incredibly wonderful. And all I could think of was the gratitude I felt towards my parents for obligating me to speak Spanish at home when I was a child. Because of them, I was able to fit perfectly with my new environment. And look, my Spanish wasn't as good as native Colombian Spanish, but I understood 100% of the language, and I was able to enjoy my time there. So when I came back to the USA, I immediately felt the contrast. But that's for another video, the pros and cons of living in the USA. And if you want me to make that video, leave a comment and share and subscribe now. Okay, so although I am bilingual and I'm of Hispanic ethnicity, I still think and act like a North American, and that'll never change. However, the more I spoke Spanish while in Colombia, the more I felt like a Colombian person. There were still actions that I made that stand me out as an outsider, like the way I walked or the way I dressed, how I expressed myself, like how loud my speech was, because we do speak loud, the amount of food that I ate. Well, it's not normal in a foreign country, but apart from those observations, in my mind, I felt I was fitting in. Primarily, it was because of the language, because of the countless stories my parents had shared with me about Colombia when I was young, and everything they taught me about my ancestors, the food, the humor, the music I listened to. I listened to music from my mom and dad's record collections, and I was listening at a very early age, and all of a sudden, all of that made sense. And I was like, it was like I had stepped into a movie and I didn't need any subtitles for this movie. And so this topic, not letting your kids forget their native language, is very dear and near to my heart. And so that's why I decided to make this video for you. And if you're struggling with this at home, here in the USA with your kids, or you're planning to move to the USA and you've wondered how are you going to keep your kids interested in their culture, then this chat's exactly what you need to hear. And there's more, so let's continue. Okay, guys, let me take you back in time. I was born in Queens, New York, raised in South Florida from the age of 3, and I had thought that everyone in the USA spoke Spanish. And the first day of kindergarten at the age of 5, I was hit with the stark reality that I had been speaking a foreign language in the country I was born, the United States of America. And after some ridicule in the classroom, boo-hoo-hoo, because kids are kids, the teacher identified the problem, and that was easy for her. She just didn't understand one word I was saying, right? And so I was quickly transported to a speech therapist down the hall. And I remember the speech therapist teaching me, like, how to properly pronounce the TH, S, F, D, consonant cluster, stop T, flap T, long vowel, short vowel, the Z, the H, and all of those pesky little sounds that can make you want to throw in the towel when you're learning this English. Lucky for you, you've subscribed to my channel and you've watched all of my videos. So you, my friends, you don't have that problem anymore, do you? And so going back to my story, with this sudden life shock, I remember running home, and I was furious at my parents because they taught me the wrong language. I wanted nothing to do with Spanish, and I begged my mom to stop calling me Jorge and start calling me George. And I also wondered why my family couldn't speak English. Here's what you have to understand. Growing up in a predominantly Anglo-Saxon environment, being one of 3 Latino kids in my elementary school in a small town in South Florida, that's changed a lot lately. But I no longer wanted to speak Spanish. But my parents, being the strong Colombians that they were, laughed and said, "In this house, we speak Spanish and you will too." I'm so thankful to that this day because they didn't cave into a 5-year-old's demands and childish requests. You see what I'm saying? So ask yourself, have you caved in to your child's demands? Well, as long as they are under your roof, they will speak the language of their ancestors. At least that's our hopes, right? Because in reality, it's hard to say no to our kids because we love them, right? And if you're curious whether or not my child is bilingual, the answer is yes. And she embraces her Colombian heritage, very proud to be a Latina, and she is second-generation American-born. It only takes one generation to completely wipe out any traces of history. You see, if I kept our Colombian culture a secret from my daughter, and if she grew up only knowing English, then her children would be completely oblivious to their family's past and heritage. And so we have to find ways to motivate them, motivate our children to at least maintain an acceptable level of their native tongue. In my daughter's case, she speaks perfect English and perfect Spanish. But going back to my story. The early years were a struggle balancing English and Spanish, but thankfully, as the years went by and I entered my early teens, being a Latino in Miami was all of a sudden a good thing. The girls wanted to date you because you were Latino, and everybody wanted to be Latino. And the rise of breakdancing, Latin freestyle, I mean, these things were permeating on the radio airwaves. That helped further the cause. And having a mustache back in the 80s, They helped. So I began to embrace my Latino culture. I started falling in love with my roots. Music such as cumbia, vallenato, Latin freestyle, Latin hip-hop, and salsa was all I blasted from my car. And the fact that I spoke and understood Spanish was an incredible feeling. And once again, I was so grateful to my parents for this gift, because that's what it is. It's a gift. Thanks to my mom and dad, my grandfather and aunt, which I had forgotten to mention, I now possess this lifelong gift. So this language thing is an essential aspect of culture and identity. So when immigrants retain their native tongue, what they're doing is preserving their cultural heritage, and they're passing it on to the next generation. And that's exactly what my parents did for me. Not all of my family members were this lucky, and some of them, they express their frustration now in their adulthood, and they wish their parents would have taught them about their ancestors, about their culture, and taught them another language. So let's talk about global competition. Okay, now, this is where it gets very important for the future of our children. And if you're an immigrant parent, then you know how important a high-paying professional job is for the future of your children and your grandchildren, especially if the piece of cardboard they give your child when they graduate from the university says, "Good old America." And so if you're watching this video, chances are you are an immigrant mom or dad. And then you know how important our children's future in this competitive world is. And proficiency in multiple languages, it's a valuable asset, correct? Oh yeah. Why? Well, because businesses and organizations, they often seek individuals who can communicate and understand different cultures and markets. Now, another important aspect of having bilingual children is maintaining a connection with your friends and families. The friends and families who still live in your home country. Many immigrants, we have friends and families back in our home countries, in your home countries, and by preserving that native language, these connections can remain strong. Remember my story about Colombia? Well, years later, we ended up moving to Colombia. And during that extended period living there, I managed to connect with family members I had never known. And I traveled freely throughout the country. And every day was an adventure. And I never needed a translator to follow me. And I was able to interact with everyone in Colombia. Everyone. And I understood my parents' traditions and quickly understood the values they upheld in our home in the United States. I understood why my home environment as a child was different than my friends' homes, because they brought the values and the happiness to the United States from their country, Latin America. And they filled our home with those values and happiness. And I was able to enjoy life for the first time in many years as a result of living in Colombia. And as a result of having two languages, I experienced life differently than a monolinguist, because a monolinguist is a tourist. A polylinguist, we want to submerge ourselves in the culture of the country that we're visiting. Now, let's talk educational advantages. Bilingual or multilingual children, they're going to find it easier to learn additional languages as they've already developed a language learning skill. And this could lead to expanded educational opportunities and greater appreciation for linguistic and cultural diversity. In Colombia, I took my life experiences of learning a language, and we opened a bilingual school offering English to a Spanish-speaking population. Our students, they range from ages 1 year to 6 years. They would graduate with perfect English. And what was my method? It was so simple. And it was so simple, it went over the professional educators' heads. And here's the secret. I made it mandatory that all teachers in my school spoke to the students only in English. Because remember, this school, it was in Colombia, a Spanish-speaking country. So I was basically doing what my mom and dad had done to me at home. Only this time it was in reverse, right? So the plan was a huge success. The kids were now fluent in Spanish, their native language, and English, my native language. And that was an amazing experience for everyone. And again, I was thankful for my parents for forcing me to speak Spanish while I was living under their roof. So Spanish opened the doors to experiences I would have never had if I was a monolinguist. Experiences few people on this planet can ever dream of living. And not to brag, okay? But this is to bring your attention that your children will have the doors open to experiencing new cultures, foods, music, people, and places if you do your job at home. And now we will discuss some strategies to get your kids interested in their culture and identity. And a very important disclaimer, listen carefully, guys and gals, so we avoid any misunderstanding. I embrace American culture because that's the country I was born in. This is a country that gave my family an opportunity to grow. Apart from the political problems that we're having here in the USA, this country is a great country and is filled with wonderful people. So preserving the native tongue does not mean rejecting American culture, because I never rejected American culture. I'm proud to be an American, and I love my fellow Americans. Practical tips for parents, and here are some practical tips for parents to ensure their child doesn't forget their native language. Number one, start early and begin exposing your child to the native language from an early age. Babies, they're an excellent language learners and they can easily pick up sounds and patterns. Okay? Number two, consistency is key. Use the native language consistently at home, and you're going to create an environment where the primary language spoken is the native tongue, just like my parents and family members did in our home. And this consistency is going to reinforce language skills. Number three, be a role model as a parent. Lead by example. Speak the native language with your child and among family members. When children see their parents using the language, they are more likely to adopt it as well. There will be a period where the child may question why you're not speaking English, but just be strong and stand your ground. If you don't, then chances are that later in life, your kid is going to want to know why you kept them from learning their native tongue. They will blame you. And what will your response be? Next, incorporate language into daily life. Integrate the native language into daily routines and activities. Use it during meals, bedtime stories, and while playing together, while praying together. Make language learning a fun and natural part of everyday life. You're going to use media resources, books, TV, shows, movies, and music in the native language tongue. To this day, I love watching Spanish sitcoms and I love watching TV shows. They bring me back in time. And I remember how much I enjoyed watching those shows with my parents who are no longer with me. Next, language apps and games. There are numerous language learning apps and games designed for children. So you're going to choose ones that focus on the native language and encourage your child to use them. Okay, next one, encourage bilingual reading. You're going to encourage your child to read fiction books or comics in the native language. This practice helps develop vocabulary and comprehension skills. And my go-to book was Condorito. And I jokingly tell people that I learned Spanish by reading this comic book. Celebrate cultural traditions and holidays that involve using the native language. Now, this helps your child connect emotionally to the language and to its cultural significance. And make sure it's filled with good music. If you have poor taste in music from your native country, then it's time to learn the good songs from your native country. Because the music I was raised listening to was off the charts. It was infectious and full of energy. Had it been boring, chances are I would have never listened to it, you know? And actually, some songs, when they come on, the minute I hear the first few notes, it brings a warm, nostalgic feeling to my heart. And I remember my parents dancing and singing. So give your child that gift, okay? Be patient and supportive because language learning takes time. And children may mix the language or initially they're going to show resistance. Just be patient and supportive and avoid any negative associations with the native tongue. Travel to the home country if possible. You're going to travel to the country where the native language is spoken. Like immersion in the language and culture, it can be a very powerful motivator for language retention. If you do this, do not, by any circumstances, take your child to the poverty-stricken areas because this will leave a permanent scar and one they may never get out of their heads. So they will associate this negative experience with your native tongue. So take them to the nicer places. Remember, the goal is not just to have your child speak the language fluently, but it's also to have them appreciate and embrace their cultural heritage. Making language learning enjoyable will create a positive attitude toward the native tongue, and it's going to increase the likelihood of long-term retention. Teach your child to fully participate in both worlds because it's possible. Let them live, sing, let them fall in love, and be happy in this world. My love of God in Jesus Christ's name has given me complete peace and happiness. I pray for peace and joy for all watching this video in Jesus Christ's name and for our children's future. So God bless you. See you guys next time.